I've done so many of these now, and I still get like so genuinely excited to have like badass women like yourself on who take the time to talk to me and obviously the listeners about just the incredible path that you've had and how your career has evolved. I mean, I always like when I'm doing the research and I look through, all of the incredible like projects you've been a part of, the companies you've worked with, the people you've collaborated with. It's just so impressive, to look at this. And I wonder when you look at your own resume or at your own bio, do you go, wow, I'm a badass. Like I've done a lot. Like, like do you have that sense of pat yourself on the back a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, because I think we sometimes we can be so focused on the journey. Sometimes we have like women especially can forget to like zoom out a little bit and just admire and revel in what you've built. So I hope you do that often.
Well, thank you. And I don't. But, speaking with people like you and talking to younger people coming up, it definitely reminds me
Yeah.
what the journey's been. But I'm always also looking about what's ahead and what I'm going to be leaving behind. So I appreciate everything that you're saying.
Take us back to the beginning of your journey and how you discovered this crazy business of ours.
Yeah, it is a crazy business. So I'm Canadian and I went to law school because I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I kind of did. I just wasn't admitting it.
Mm.
And I hated law school. I dropped out. I found this program, which was an exchange program for NAFTA, which way back then when it was between Canada and Mexico. And it was basically teaming up people who are wanting to be, young people wanting to be in certain businesses. And so what I did is I lived with a family in Mexico City and worked at Televisa, which, as most people know, is basically Mexico's primary TV network. Yeah. And so I was an intern there. It was incredible. It was crazy. I'd never seen anything like it. And I learned a lot. And after being there for a couple of months, I was still hungry for more. And I found out that the Mask of Zorro was shooting. And I knocked on the door and said, please take me. And then they actually ended up hiring me as a production secretary. And I was on that show for, it was a very, very long show. So I was on that for a while. And then one of the producers needed an assistant, and I came to LA, and it's just kind of been about, discovery and
Yeah.
learned about development. I had no idea that that was a path. I didn't really know about producing, but because I witnessed it while I was on the set of Zorro, and then also doing more in LA and talking to more people, I discovered that there's a creative path to producing.
So when you step on the set of Mask of Zorro, which was obviously a huge film to kind of be your first foray into this weird and crazy business, what was that time like? What was that like, realization for you of how many people it takes to do the work and how many different little jobs exist to make up the whole?
I mean, it was pretty incredible. I
Yeah.
remember going on a set, one of the sets that was like a hacienda, and so much was built around it. It was incredible how many people were involved. And yeah, it really opened up my eyes. But I'd been involved with theater as a younger person, as a teenager. And so I understood what that collaboration involved and, behind this stage, in front of the stage. So I understood that. I just didn't really understand the
Yeah.
massive undertaking that a film
Yeah.
like that, you know.
And so was your family bummed that after this experience you decide to go to LA and continue to pursue that dream? Were they expecting that you go back, or are they kind of like, we know this is it
No,
for
that
her?
is not what they were thinking or hoping for. They definitely wanted me to go back to law school.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
now they appreciate it.
Can you talk a little bit about at that time, right? Because we have a lot of people that listen to the show that are sort of the beginning of their career, and to go from like a production secretary and then get to be mentored and shepherded by a producer who then brings you to LA. Like, what do you think it was about what you were bringing to the table at
Mhm.
that time as a new person in the space that made this producer go, her, we're gonna
Yeah.
bring her in?
Yeah. And, that first job was just filling in for an assistant who was gone for the summer. So it wasn't even a full-time job. But I think, you know, I, they say ignorance is bliss. And that really kind of was my experience where I just didn't really understand the hierarchy. I was a very can-do person. I still am, obviously, but I think that was recognized as something that I could jump into things and really make a go of it without really having a lot of background in it, and just being resourceful. So I think that was part of it.
Yeah. I mean, would you agree that now, however many years later, when you're looking to bring new people into your ecosystem, is that like a huge part of what you look for, in a young and hungry person? Is that can-do attitude? Is that enthusiasm for it above many other things that some on the outside may think, well, I won't be able to do this until I have that?
No, I think it's really about understanding that there is a future for you or for anybody entering into the business if they're thinking one step ahead of what do I ultimately, and it's a discovery. So, but what do I want to do and how do I get there? And, um, looking at, say, for example, if you're an assistant or you want to become an assistant, in the development track of things, look at what the person above that is, like you're the junior executive, and they're reading and they're creating community and contacts, and they're, really figuring out just kind of what those next steps would be. And I think that that's really, really helpful in terms of understanding how to get to where one would want to get to.
It's interesting because I find that, I came up very much in physical production, and I always say to anyone who's like getting in and that so many of the hard skills can be learned, but the soft skills are so it's kind of like you either have that or you don't. You really have to have that attitude. You need to be consumed by it to the point where you love it so much that it does become your priority for a certain amount of years until you've like proven yourself a bit where you can be going and elevating to that next level of what you're doing. And so many people still hit me up and have like, resumes and all of this, but ultimately it's like, I just want to know that you're going to show up and have the best attitude and be able to do the job. Like all of the other stuff is almost irrelevant when someone is starting out. And for me, like the people that bring that are the ones that I end up investing in, because no matter, to your point, as they're navigating where they want to go, like wherever they end up, if they bring that with them, they're going to be okay. So
Mm-hmm.
yes. Okay. So then you come to LA, and then what happens next after you work with this producer?
Um, I end up working at Imagine Entertainment as an
Mm-hmm.
assistant to Julie Glucksman, who was VP at the time. And she's amazing, amazing, brilliant human being. And I learned a ton. It was a really good place to be starting in that it had a lot of tentacles where there were a ton of people at the company itself. There was a ton of relationships, and it really exposed me to the world, in a way that I think if I was at a smaller entity, I wouldn't have had as much insight into what really makes the business on a grander scale work. So that was my lucky introduction.
And what is that? If you could distill that to like a nugget, what was that takeaway for you at the time of what makes the business work?
I think the politics of it really um, drove home for me. And then also that it's not just uh, it's not just a simple kind of lowest common denominator content that really pushes things over the edge. there's a lot of sophistication and intellectual conversation, and some incredibly smart people who are behind movie making and TV. And I wasn't sure about that. And it was really eye-opening.
I always find it interesting as a person who didn't come up anywhere near how you've come up. Like, at what point someone knows that they've maybe tapped out or maxed out with what they're there to learn, or accessibility they're going to have for upward mobility before they leapfrog to a different company or to the next, tier of the track. Like, how when you're ready, if you ever even know, or is it just a matter of the opportunity kind of arising and you just leaning in?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was, again, very fortunate in that Julie Glucksman then moved to Jenno Topping's company, and I was able to have even more leeway. And she was a real mentor to me, Julie, in that she encouraged me to read, she encouraged me to be in meetings, and I really enjoyed that experience, and it just made me hungry for more. And so at a certain point, I was just, you kind of know it, if you're not as excited about what you're doing in that moment, or you have more to give, that's the time, but I think that one should not give up too easily, and really understand that at a certain level, like as an assistant, there is a lot to learn. And so, 6 months into that job, just trying to leapfrog, it's not always the best thing. It's really good to, if you have a good situation and you really are learning. So I think that's the key. When you feel like you've stopped learning, then it's kind of the next step.
She was a big part of your career. At what point did you part ways and go to the next thing that you
Yeah, I
were
mean, I wasn't with her
destined to
for
do?
that long. I think in total
Yeah.
it was 2 years, but it was like formative. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so then I was hired as a CE at Red Wagon Entertainment with Doug Wick and Lucy Fisher. And I was at that company for a very long time. And I was able to, again, like rise up through the ranks of that company. And because they were embedded in Sony and, had real studio level material, again, I was on the inside of that system. And it was, it was fascinating to kind of be a part of and to learn from.
Yeah. So then, how long were you at Red Wagon? How many years was that?
I think
Said you
12,
start. You started in 2000.
maybe
12
11.
years.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
A long time.
a big chunk of your life. I mean, so what is it that is required of a creative, especially as a woman, and at that time too? Obviously, things have evolved quite a bit, but to sustain the and navigate the ups and downs of, I'm sure that you experienced professionally or personally during those 12 years within the same company.
Yeah. And I think it's also generational, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
Gen Z, millennials, especially Gen Z, they're used to um, really moving around because things change so much, and like the gig economy. For me, at least at that time, and I do think I have colleagues and friends who've stayed at studios for years and years and years. There's just a different sensibility around it.
Mm.
But just going back to the question of being a woman, like, again, I was really fortunate. I had one of my bosses at the time, Gail Lyon, woman, really forceful, great, executive. Lucy Fisher, partner in the company.
Yeah.
She is an incredible human being, and just, really was at the forefront of kind of breaking through as a woman.
Mm.
Previous generation to me. So that was great. And then at the studio, Amy Pascal, there was like a whole bunch of executives who are women. So for me, it never really clicked until, frankly, more recently, that women weren't kind of part of the bigger structure of things, just because I had so many, examples of it around me. It was, so I was a little bit sheltered in that way, I would say.
Interesting. So you would say more recently, like as in when you left that company, or what is more recently then?
I guess maybe as I was getting more involved with production itself, you really see the disparity,
Yeah.
and or at least you did, and you still do.
I mean, yeah, I still do.
And just how women are treated differently. And I'm sure if I was in a different environment or different kind of mix of male female, in at a different workspace or a different company, I would have felt it more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the production aspect of it is a whole thing. I know like I have the good fortune of looking younger than I am, and it's really hard to be in a position of leadership and commanding generally men who are in their 50s and have been in production specifically their whole life and look at you like you're just a little girl and talk to you as such. The
Mm-hmm.
amount of times I get called adorable or sweetie, or just, it's not even inappropriate in the vein of some of the horrible stories that came out of obviously the Me Too movement, but just that constant having to not only do the job and do it well, right, but deal with these microaggressions from men and sometimes women, frankly. It's just people in that space, because I feel like production is the trenches. It's like where it's like the gladiator. You're in the war zone of everything that
Yeah.
we're here to do and we talk about, and it breeds a certain kind of person and it attracts a certain type of personality as well. That there are definitely these archetypes I have found now after doing it for so many years. But the struggle of that, and I think the emotional exhaustion of that was never really something even I considered until I think the Me Too movement really brought that in light for me, of how I had been impacted by that in ways that it never occurred to me, because I was like, oh, this is just how it is. Like, it never occurred to me that maybe I was having that experience because I was a woman, right? And I think we've made a lot of progress, yes, but we're still so far behind, and what we're here to do, and the respect that women have to work just as hard to receive. But yeah, so then after Red Wagon, 11 years there, what was the next step for you? How come you felt it was time to leave? What was the next adventure?
Yeah. So I came to OddLot Entertainment, and that's then transitioned to Madison Wells, which so it's the same company, but not the same people, Gigi Pritzker's company.
Yeah.
And I was really excited to be on a financing side. I wanted to be able to make movies that were independent. It was just something that I was interested in at the time. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, obviously, I still am. And having the financing behind those decisions, um, and it was something I was looking for. It was exciting to have the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Did you have any preconceived ideas of what that was going to be like for you, having the financing, having that backing versus the realities of what it was like? Did they match?
I knew what the realities were, but experiencing it is a different thing. Understanding, really being on the other side of the responsibility of where the dollars go and the risk involved, and how, for me, I wanted to be as respectful as possible for that, and making the right decisions, balancing it with my producerial instincts,
Mm-hmm.
um, wanting to protect the director, wanting to protect the material. It's a really fine balancing act, and really took a little bit of time for me to kind of fall into and integrate into how I operated.
What was the biggest challenge that do you feel like you've overcome, finding that balance for yourself and navigating both of those roles?
Yes, definitely. I
Yeah.
definitely do. And I think the thing that's most important, frankly, is having a producer. I mean, not always, but either having an incredibly close relationship with your director, or having a producer who's, you know, day in, day out on set that you really can work with and trust, if you're not going to be that person. So,
Yeah.
you know, like with The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which I just produced.
Yes, and congrats. It's amazing.
Thank
I
you.
just watched
Thank
it
you.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Really blown away by it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, Jessica Chastain is an incredible producer, and she originally found the doc, and brought it to me and Gigi. And her partner, Kelly Carmichael, you know, it's just a great team. I mean, they're really fantastic producers. So we weren't financing. So we brought to Searchlight, and it was kind of a relief, you know, not having to balance the two.
Yeah.
But you know, there's pros and cons. It's much more difficult in some ways to be constantly selling and convincing people that what you see is what they should be seeing.
Yeah. I think that's such a great note that most wouldn't necessarily consider. I'd say that the responsibility of the financing and what that means, and having to like literally straddling this line of both worlds, and how that can be, you know, a very anxiety inducing process for some. I think the impression one would have is like, once you have the money, everything is so much easier. You just get to go make whatever you want, right? Like, it's just, that's the thing. Everyone asks, how do I get my thing financed? Where are the financiers? Where is the money? It's like the first question most people have when they're starting out. But I think most people don't think about the next level of that. Like, once you do have that money, like, how do you sustain having that money? And if you are lucky enough to have a fund, like, how do you keep that going from a business perspective, right? It's a very high risk, high return field. But yeah, it's like everyone just seems to think that that's the answer. Once you have that, everything just magically, the gates of Hollywood open for you. But the more I speak to women like yourself who are at this next level, like, the more it's like the air is thinner at the top. You know, you have less, it seems like, less leeway to make those calls that could backfire. The responsibility is tremendous. Like, I can't even imagine, you know. I think like when I think about these $100 million movies that don't work,
Yeah.
don't make their money back, it's rough, but hey,
Yeah.
that's the gig, right? So now that you're at Madison Wells, like, how has the mandate at Madison Wells shifted since it was OddLot, if it has?
Yeah, no, it definitely has, and it's very much aligned with how I think about material, and I've always thought about, um, you know, the creative process. And there's been a real focus on telling stories about, you know, as you say, badass women, and people pushing boundaries, and really focusing on voices that just aren't getting the pathway to audiences. And so for me, it's been really exciting, just to hone in on that mission. And, you know, inadvertently and subconsciously, it's kind of what I've always been doing or trying to do, you know, but this is something now, as a mandate that I am welcoming.
How do you define a badass woman?
Such a big question.
I know, it's fun.
I really believe a badass woman is somebody who, not that they don't have fear, but they push past the fear. They're in touch with what they want, who they are, and they don't back down. You know, they will keep the tenacity, and really keep pushing forward, and, you know, get past those no's.
Yeah. And in that vein, how would you define a producer now that you've kind of have touched many different, you know, strands of it? It seems, what is that definition for you now?
You know, it's really interesting because there's so many components of producing. It really is kind of a mix between being like a building contractor and a therapist and a
Yeah.
mother. Now there's more to it, but those are really a lot of the components and the qualities that one needs to be successful as a producer. And also, I'm looking at some of my friends who are incredibly pretty successful. There's like an energy level, like you have to keep your energy up. You have to be able to like function without sleep. You have to be super organized and focused. And there's a real kind of left brain aspect to it that complements some of the right brain that other people are bringing to the table.
So what I'm hearing is that no matter how high you climb or how much success you reach as a producer, or it seems like anyone in this business, the hustle never really stops. It's constant. And I say this because I've met a lot of young people that have been entering the business who seem to have this idea that once you get to, you have a first look deal or you have an overall or whatever the thing is that they, place on that pedestal for them, that then it just gets easier.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's not the case.
No, I wouldn't say that's the case, but I also think that there are choices that people can make in terms of how they want to approach their work. And do they want to be working insane hours? Do they want to be having like juggling like 12 projects at once? And to make ends meet, yeah, on one hand, you have to do that. But on the other hand, maybe there are other ways of approaching it. And the thing that I'm excited about, like this newer generation, is that the holistic sensibility around living is valued in a way that I don't think it was in the past. And obviously it's not for everybody of a younger age, but I appreciate that to a degree that, life is about living and it's not about working oneself to death. And this movement now for safer work hours and higher wages for writers, all of that is really finding ways of equity and also kind of considering what work in this industry is really about.
Yeah. What do you love about your job?
I love to kind of imagine what could be created and working with writers and working with directors who are just brilliant in their visions. I love the concept of putting teams together and what that can create, because every team kind of evolves and is a different combination of a result, and so for me it's really enjoyable to think about, okay, what would happen if these two actors and that director and this DP all come together at once, and how exciting. It's almost like planning a party, and for me it's really fun to be able to kind of make that happen and sustain it.
I love that. I want to switch gears a little bit because, so much of the show for me was born out of my own frustration with navigating how, at that time, so much of my identity was really formed by my job description, right? And how I would let that define me to an extent.
Yes.
And my self-worth oftentimes as a woman, and especially as a freelancer, you're like, why am I not getting the calls? I'm seeing this producer who always hires me on social, hiring someone else. Like, so hard to navigate that. Have you felt that in your career, and how have you navigated in yourself? Because the longevity and the endurance that is required, in my opinion, now that I'm so deep into my own journey, to sustain that level of yourself, to show up in this business, is so important, and I don't think often talked about. So how have you navigated that for yourself?
I think honoring your emotional response to disappointment is really important, acknowledging it, because it's human. It's not inhuman to if you're passionate about something, it doesn't work out, like, of course you're going to have some sort of a reaction to it. And you should feel bummed and you should feel like that sucks. But in some ways, for me, I go through that and then it's almost like it's re-energizing, where I'm like, I'm going to make it happen this time. this is still what I want to do. I'm going to get it done. So there's that downward element, but then it kind of like picks me back up. And then, particularly for what we do, I'll watch a movie, or I'll go see an art show, or, go to a concert, and I'm just completely inspired. And it brings back to me the reason why I'm doing this, gives me more energy. And yeah, it's not easy, but the tenacity of continuing and getting up and, doing that after you've actually spent a moment and acknowledged that it's okay that you're feeling a certain way is a really powerful thing.
Yeah. Was there ever a moment where you were like, I'm going to leave the business? This is too much. Like, I can't, this is not sustainable, especially when you were starting out, right? And maybe you got to see some of the paths that were available to you with others 10, 20 years down the line. And did you ever go, wow, like that's what this could look like for me? Like, it's never going to get easier. The work is never going to be less. Like, whoa, like, did you ever have that?
Not exactly. I wouldn't say that. Doing what you do for a long period of time, at least for me, there was a moment where I was just like, is this, reevaluation? Is this 100% what I want to be doing for the next 10 years, the next 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I did kind of flirt with some other concepts of what my future would look like. So it was a little bit of a reevaluation. And I just constantly came back to this. This is
Yeah.
what I love doing.
Yeah. Well, and with all the incredible things you've already done, I mean, what do you feel rather is there still left for you to do? What are some of your goals that you still have for yourself?
Well, I definitely have not done that much, and nor have I, hit the apex of it.
Yeah.
At all. I'm constantly learning, which I love to do. And I'm constantly looking at mentors. I'm constantly looking at my friends and just seeing how they approach situations. And I'm always inspired by so many of the people that are in my circle and want to emulate, so I'm stepping into TV. It's a space that, with the Genius Show, I'm definitely involved with. I have a certain amount of projects set up with
Mm-hmm.
Madison Wells, and at networks. And that's definitely like another hill, like to really kind of engage in. My dog's growling right now. I just think that you can reach a lot of people right now through that medium. And I'd love to
Yeah.
be much more engaged in it. And on the feature side, the same way. I think right now my goal is to try and reach a bigger audience, an audience as big as possible, while still maintaining art and concept and emotion and, impact, but really finding things that audiences are going to tap into.
Yeah. How do you then create space still in your life for the good old, work life balance, which I don't love that question because I think that's misleading. I don't think balance is the word, but how do you create space in your life for these other things to fill your well creatively, to inspire you, but also things that have nothing to do with the business? Like, was there a roadblock for you in your trajectory, and then you sort of figured out how to get around it and have a little bit of better dynamics with that space?
Yeah, and something I'm still working on, but um, I think it's very empowering to create boundaries. And it's a little bit about recognizing one's own self-worth and knowing that you don't have to be on call 24/7. And if you can say no to certain things, it makes you more empowered, and therefore you in turn will be perceived in that manner. And so there'll just be more respect for yourself and for others in terms of how they treat you. And I think it's really about, recognizing that you're a human being, you're not a machine, and how you want to live your life. What do you want for your life? And obviously, like, if going 24/7 is your passion and that's what makes you sing, that's what makes you happy, then that's great. And if you get energized by it and there's just nothing more than you want in your life, that's awesome. But just being in touch with what you want and how you want to create your present is important.
I think that's massive. I feel like you have to take inventory of the journey, and if you're headed in the path that you want, in the speed that you want, and how you're showing up for that. Because I've met a lot of people that kind of blinked and a decade passed and they were stuck doing something that they necessarily didn't want to be doing, because they were like just going, and they thought, like, to your point, like, yes, I love working, I love doing this, but it was always with the goal to shift gears and go somewhere else. And then they kind of didn't, and they missed a window. And I wonder, if that is kind of what breeds a lot of the cynicism and unhappiness in our industry, is people that kind of get stuck in a lane that they never really wanted to be in, and never gave themselves the opportunity to take that space and create those boundaries. And yes, I think this industry attracts a lot of really ambitious type A people. It's scary to take the foot off the gas when you do love it and you are ambitious to that point, and it's all you kind of know, and trusting that creating those boundaries actually may bring you better opportunities than they would if you were going and sort of like working yourself to the bone. I always say, like, having something else that isn't necessarily this business that also fills your well, I think is a really good way to have that gauge, so that you don't get too lost in it, and you have something that pulls you out and reminds you that there's like a world outside of our world, our Hollywood bubble. So yeah. And that's just my own monologue on that. Like, I think
Very good monologue.
Thank you. Best podcast monologue goes to. Okay. So I have one final question before we move to the lightning round. If there was a legacy that you could leave behind, what would you want that to be?
Yeah. I think there's a dual legacy. I think one is to pass on as much as possible that it's the people. I mean, it sounds very trite, but it really is about how one interacts and respects another human being. And it's something that I've learned over the years, that it's not an exclusive element to being successful. In some ways, it actually informs those who are successful. And so there's that and things are changing, and I'm really excited about that. And then secondarily, I really want to continue working hard to create change in the business, from helping others find paths to inclusivity and representation, not only for myself, but for the industry as a whole. And what are the details we need to be doing to get there, as opposed to it just being this kind of overarching statement. And hopefully the business will change even more as things progress, and it has so much as of now. So, but there needs more. So those are the two things that I'd love to be able to leave behind.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I mean, I think, like, even just being having these conversations, to me, it feels like definitely a step in that direction. I hope that this podcast, this show, can be like a little time capsule that anyone can discover however many years down the line, and it can provide that insight to them, and showing them the various incredible journeys that women and people of color, which is very much the goal, the focus of my show, have had to get where they are and what is possible. I hope it leaves people with that sense of possibility. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. Lightning round. Angle producers. What's a song that teleports you to a happy place?
Age of Aquarius.
What is the last piece of art that moved you? It could be a book, a film, a show.
Going to the Hollywood Bowl for the first time in 2 years, and experiencing what that, just the music, it was great.
Amazing. What show did you see?
St. Vincent.
Nice. Okay. Okay, fill in the blank. When I'm overworked, blank helps ease the stress.
Wine.
Yes. That is the go-to for like 85% of answers is wine. I feel like wine should be a sponsor of the show if we're going to make it happen. What is one of the most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And it doesn't have to be financial.
It's a really good thing. I was gonna say my Peloton. Yes, my Peloton.
Hey, I love it. Okay. So the last and final question. Growing up, I loved Inside the Actor Studio. I hope to have Inside the Producer Studio one day. So borrowing from that show, the final question, which was inspired by the famed French journalist Bernard Pivot, which is, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
What a question. You are welcome. Not just welcome, but you are welcome.
I love that. I love that. Well, this has been such a treat. Thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with me, to share a little bit of your wisdom with the listeners and your journey. It's so special. I hope and dream that like 10 years from now, I can revisit this with a lot of the women and just see like where things are at and like compare the conversations. That would be so fun personally. But no, just endless gratitude to you. And yeah, any parting words?
No, just to you, thank you so much. And I'm very curious in 10 years from now, where you're going to be, because you obviously have a ton of insight, and it's been a real pleasure to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.